Right now you are currently being controlled by a ghost.
A ghost. Okay, starting strong today.
I am. And before you go check your locks or something, I don't mean a literal spirit floating in your hallway.
Right, right.
I'm talking about a phantom architect, like this societal watcher living deep inside your subconscious.
Whoa, absolutely. The internal critic.
Exactly. It's the voice that makes you, buy things you don't actually need, chase careers you secretly kind of hate, and judge yourself against standards you didn't even set.
And most of us just call that, well, life.
Right. We just accept it. But what if there was a way to exercise that ghost? What if the search for meaning didn't actually require you to subscribe to some, I don't know, dogmatic ancient theology?
Or on the flip side, what if it didn't force you to settle for the cold, sterile reductionism of modern self-help?
Yes. You know the kind. Those books that just tell you to optimize your morning routine, drink more water, and, hustle harder.
Yeah, the biohacking your way to happiness trend.
Right. Instead of all that, what if there was a psycho-spiritual architecture? Like a literal, multidimensional geometry for the soul?
It is a jarring concept, honestly, but arguably a very necessary one right now.
For sure. Because we're living in this era defined by profound spiritual dissociation.
We really are. If you look around, people are walking around with these completely fragmented identities. We're experiencing this wildly accelerating technological and cultural change.
It's exhausting.
It is. And we might call epistemic instability.
Which is just a fancy way of saying nobody knows what is true anymore.
Exactly. People are just incredibly hungry for coherence, for some kind of anchor in all this mess.
But the old narratives don't work.
No, they don't. The traditional religions or the mid-century American dream, they just do not hold up to the sheer complexity of modern life. They kind of crumble under the weight of our current contradictions.
Which brings us to the actual mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring the really groundbreaking work of Angelo James Camilio.
Yes, and it is a massive body of work.
It is. We have a stack of his foundational texts in front of us right now. PAST theory on psychophilosophy, a recursive praxis, and the hypertetrahedron.
And we should warn you, these texts are incredibly dense.
Oh, totally. They blend high-level philosophy, psychoanalysis, and radical pedagogy all together.
But our goal for you, the listener, is to kind of extract the mechanisms from all this academic language and build a usable framework for living.
Right. We are essentially going to look at how you might actually practice what Camilio calls the hypertetrahedron as a secular religion of, well, continuous sacred transformation.
And we should probably set the terms of engagement right at the outset here.
Good idea.
If you are tuning in hoping for a list of 10 easy rules for a perfect life, or like a static truth to just blindly believe in, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, this framework explicitly rejects final destinations.
Exactly. There is no heaven to reach, no ultimate state of enlightenment where you just sit on a cloud and never feel stressed again.
Which is honestly a relief.
It is. Instead, what we're offering today is a curriculum of practice. We're going to start by mapping the hidden forces in the human mind. Then we'll break down the mechanics of how that mind can actually move and change.
And finally, we will construct that multidimensional sacred geometry of the self. So let's get into it. We can't build a religion without understanding the worshiper, right?
Right. We have to map the territory first.
So we need to open the hood and look at the engine of the human mind. And to do this, Camilio uses a framework called PAST theory.
Which stands for Psychophilo-Pedagogical Agency Through Symbols and Transformations.
Quite the academic mouthful there.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from heavy titles. But despite the jargon, what this actually does is lay out a literal pantheon of the psyche.
It breaks our mental landscape down into specific acting forces. Let's start with the surface level, the conscious forces. These are what he calls our external idols.
Right, these are the forces we interact with daily, often completely without realizing they were running the show.
So what's the first idol?
The first idol is a concept drawn from the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. It's known as the objet O.
Objet A, okay.
We can think of this as the eternally unattainable object of desire. It represents an existential lack that fundamentally drives human ambition.
A lack, like a missing piece.
Exactly. It's the projection of a completeness that is perpetually out of reach, yet, it motivates individuals to relentlessly seek external achievements.
So like wealth or status or relationships.
Yes. The core illusion of the objet A is the belief that obtaining these things will finally make you whole.
Okay, let's ground this for a second. So the objet A is why I might think, if I just get this promotion to director, all my imposter syndrome will completely vanish and I'll finally feel respected.
Precisely. You think the title is the cure.
But the insidious mechanism of the objet A is that the moment they actually hand me the new nameplate for my desk, a totally new void opens up.
Right. The goalposts move immediately.
Now I need to be vice president to feel whole. It isn't just a goal, it's a structural mirage. I'm basically chasing a carrot on a stick.
That is the perfect way to describe it. It's a structural mirage. The lack is the whole point of the system, not the object itself.
Wow. Okay.
And dictating the shape of that mirage is the second external idol, which is the big other.
Ah, the big other.
This concept, which is also rooted in Lacan and then heavily expanded by the philosopher Slavoj Žižek, it symbolizes the collective, overarching authority of societal norms.
So it's the invisible symbolic order.
Exactly. It is the internalized watcher that sets the baseline for what constitutes a successful life, what beauty actually is, what is considered rational.
But what is morally acceptable? It's the ghost I mentioned at the very start of the deep dive.
Yes, that's your ghost. And the most dangerous aspect of the big other, as Žižek points out in his critique of ideology, is that it operates completely under the radar. It's just ambient.
Right, like background radiation. We do not consciously say to ourselves, I'm going to conform to the arbitrary standards of 21st century Western consumerism today.
No, we just assume those standards are objective reality.
We treat them like gravity, like a giant invisible billboard constantly telling us how to live.
And we measure our self-worth against this phantom yardstick, which invariably forces us to suppress our authentic desires just to fit into this idealized, socially sanctioned mold.
So those are the idols pulling our strings from the outside, the objet keeping us hungry and the big other telling us what to eat.
Right.
But the map goes deeper into what Camilio calls the subconscious battlefield. This is where the inner angels and demons live. Let's look at the pro-ego.
Okay, the pro-ego.
Now, when I first read this, I assumed it just meant having good self-esteem, like being kind to yourself. But it is actually a highly specific moral mechanism, isn't it?
Oh, it is much more complex than simple self-esteem. The pro-ego is essentially the authentic moral center of your psychic architecture.
How does he define that exactly?
Well, Camilio synthesizes this by pulling from three distinct philosophical traditions. First, he takes Max Scheller's phenomenology, which emphasizes emotional empathy and intuitive moral feeling.
So the emotional side of being good.
Yes. Second, he incorporates Lawrence Kohlberg's cognitive stages of justice-based reasoning.
So that's the rational side of ethics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And third, he weaves in Carol Gilligan's ethics of care, which focuses heavily on relationships and our responsibility to others.
So it isn't just a generic angel on your shoulder telling you to be a good boy or girl.
No, not at all. It's a highly sophisticated ethical engine.
I picture it more like a gyroscope in a submarine.
I like that. How so?
Well, you are submerged in this incredibly high-pressure environment, which is society, or the big other, constantly trying to crush your hull with expectations.
Right, the pressure is constant.
And the pro-ego is this internal navigational instrument that uses empathy, justice, and care to keep you upright and aligned with your true coordinates, regardless of the pressure outside.
That is an excellent analogy. The gyroscope maintains your structural integrity. But of course, the submarine has a saboteur on board trying to smash the gyroscope.
Let me guess. The anti-ego.
Yes, the anti-ego, the internalized societal saboteur.
Okay, so how does the saboteur work?
The anti-ego is the voice of harsh judgment and self-doubt. But, and this is crucial, it is not native to you.
It's an invader.
Basically, it is the direct echo of the big other, internalized. It is what the psychoanalyst Karen Horney described when she talked about the tyranny of the shoulds.
The tyranny of the shoulds. I love that phrasing.
It's so accurate, isn't it? The anti-ego takes all those culturally conditioned expectations like, you should be richer, you should be thinner, you should have a flawless marriage, and weaponizes them against your own psyche.
So it's basically doing the big other's dirty work from inside the house?
Exactly. It drives counterproductive behaviors like perfectionism, self-sabotage, and just chronic baseline anxiety.
It's the voice that whispers, "Who do you think you are?" when you try to start a new project.
Yes, that exact voice.
And then, lurking right next to the anti-ego, we have the shadow ID. Now, when people hear shadow, they immediately think of Carl Jung, right?
Almost always, yeah.
And they usually assume it means all the dark, twisted, evil stuff we hide from the world, like our inner serial killer or something.
Yeah. Right, but it does draw fundamentally on Jung's concept of the shadow, but reducing it merely to evil misses the point entirely.
So what is it then?
The shadow ID represents the subconscious dimension of unacknowledged potential. Yes, it contains repressed, socially unacceptable desires. That's true. But crucially, it also contains our brightest, most aspirational traits that we have suppressed out of fear.
Fear of what? Just standing out.
Fear of the anti-ego and the big other.
Oh, I see.
Let's say you have a profound, raw talent for poetry, but you grew up in a strict, hyper-capitalist household where the big other dictates that only STEM careers have actual value.
So writing poetry is seen as useless.
Right. Your anti-ego will violently suppress your artistic side to protect you from societal rejection. So that poetic brilliance gets shoved into the shadow ID. It becomes repressed potential.
Wow. So the shadow isn't just our inner demons, it's our inner genius that we've literally locked in the basement because society told us it wasn't profitable.
Precisely. And the agency tasked with navigating this total minefield between the gyroscope of the pro-ego, the saboteur of the anti-ego, and the locked vault of the shadow ID is what Camilio calls the rhizomatic ego.
Okay, this is where the terminology gets a little heavy again. Rhizomatic ego.
Stick with me here.
I will.
Yeah.
I know a rhizome in botany is a root system, right? Like ginger or bamboo that grows horizontally underground and pops up in multiple places.
Exactly.
It doesn't have a single vulnerable tree trunk. But how does that apply to human identity?
Camilio borrows this concept from the philosopher Gilles Deleuze. Traditional psychology often views the ego as a centralized, rigid command center, a single trunk, to use your analogy.
Right. I am this one thing.
But the problem with a rigid trunk is that when a strong enough storm comes, it snaps. The rhizomatic ego, by contrast, is a fluid, decentered, adaptable self.
It resists rigid categorization.
Yes, it engages in a constant process of what Deleuze calls deterritorialization,
Right.
which basically means breaking away from fixed, restrictive identities.
Okay, deterritorialization. And then what?
And then reterritorialization, which is restructuring the self in new, flexible ways depending on whatever the context demands.
So practically speaking, if I lose my job as an accountant and my entire identity was a rigid trunk labeled I am an accountant, I suffer a total psychological collapse.
Right, your trunk snapped.
But if I have a rhizomatic ego, I can deterritorialize from that label. I recognize that I'm also a father, a musician, a strategic thinker, a friend. I just, pop up through a different node in the root system.
Exactly. It is the ultimate shape-shifting survival mechanism. It allows you to maintain continuity of self without being trapped by a singular definition.
That is incredibly practical. So now beneath all of this, beneath the conscious idols and the subconscious battlefield Dutch PST theory maps out the deepest layer, right? The unconscious vaults.
Yes, the profound, sacred spaces of the mind.
And there are two main vaults here. The first is terrifyingly named the panopticon of repressed trauma and emotions.
The terminology is very deliberate. It combines Freud's concept of repression with Michel Foucault's analysis of the panopticon.
Okay, remind me how the panopticon works.
A panopticon is a theoretical prison design where the inmates can be observed by a single watchman at any time, but they cannot tell if they're currently being watched.
So they just assume they're always being watched.
Exactly. As a result, the inmates internalize the surveillance and begin to police themselves.
Man, so how does that function inside a person's head?
This vault is the hidden repository of all your unprocessed emotional material and unresolved trauma. It acts as both a guardian and a prison.
A guardian because it hides the pain so we can function.
Yes, the trauma is locked away so you can get through daily life. But because of the panoptic effect, that locked-away trauma constantly exerts an invisible policing force on your behavior.
Give me an example of that.
Say you have a paralyzing fear of public speaking. It might not be because you lack knowledge, but because the panopticon is secretly enforcing a childhood memory of being humiliated in front of a class.
Wow. So the fumes from that vault are basically seeping up and dictating your actions without your conscious consent.
Exactly. The warden is always watching.
That is incredibly vivid. And sitting adjacent to that prison of trauma is the ancient ancestral auditorium of archetypes.
This one draws heavily on Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. This vault does not contain your personal biographical memories like the panopticon does.
So that's in it then.
It contains the inherited, universal symbols and mythic structures of the human species: the hero, the sage, the caregiver, the trickster.
Like the fundamental building blocks of all stories.
Yes. These archetypes provide the underlying symbolic frameworks for how we construct meaning. When you are going through a profound struggle and you suddenly view yourself as being on a hero's journey, You are tapping into the auditorium.
It connects your isolated individual suffering to a timeless, shared human narrative. It makes you feel less alone.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have the full map of the worshiper in this secular religion. We have the external idols, the subconscious angels and demons, and the deep unconscious vaults. How does Camilio use this to define the actual practice of this religion? Like, what are the rules?
Well, what is brilliant here is how Camilio fundamentally redefines traditional religious concepts like sin and salvation.
Oh, I'm very curious about this.
In this framework, sin has nothing to do with offending a divine creator or breaking a moral commandment. Sin is structural.
Structural.
Yes, sin is submitting to the anti-ego and bowing to the big other.
Wait, really unpack that for me.
Sure, if you allow internalized societal judgments to dictate your self-worth, if you sacrifice your authentic desires to chase the mirage of the object A, you are in a state of sin.
You are basically violating your own psychic architecture.
Precisely. Salvation, on the other hand, is not a rescue operation from above. You aren't waiting for a savior.
So what is it?
Salvation is the active daily process of engaging your pro-ego, navigating the world with that gyroscope of empathy and justice, while allowing your rhizomatic ego to remain fluid, refusing to let the big other trap you in a rigid identity.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second because this honestly sounds like a paradox.
Oh.
If the big other, like society, culture, language, is literally wired into our subconscious, and if the anti-ego is constantly using our own psychological energy against us, isn't it physically impossible to ever be truly authentic? Like if the call is coming from inside the house, how do we ever break free? We can't step outside of culture to fix culture.
That is the pivotal question, really. And it is precisely why Camilio doesn't just stop at giving us a map. You're absolutely right. You cannot step outside of culture.
Right, so we're stuck.
No, but you cannot simply pray your way out of the anti-ego, nor can you just decide to be authentic. You have to use a rigorous structural methodology to hack the system from within.
Hack the system.
Yes. This brings us from the mapping phase to what the texts call the rituals of liberation.
The rituals of liberation. This is the engine of change. So how do we actually perform an exorcism on that phantom architect?
Camilio argues that any viable framework for living must be structurally generative. It cannot just diagnose the illness, it must provide the scalpel.
I like that. What's the scalpel?
He outlines a three-layered engine of change. And the very first layer of this engine is surface deconstruction.
What exactly are we deconstructing?
We're deconstructing the binary oppositions that govern your perception.
Binaries, like good and evil.
Sort of. The big other maintains control by forcing us to think in false binaries. Success versus failure, self versus other, rational versus emotional, desire versus lack. Surface deconstruction requires you to actively identify these oppositions in your own life. You have to map out how they are controlling your actions and creating artificial stress.
So if I'm a workaholic, my governing binary might be productivity versus worthlessness.
That's a very common one.
If I'm not producing, I am nothing. So surface deconstruction is just the act of pulling that binary out of the shadows and staring at it, finding the stress point in the architecture.
Exactly. Once you have identified it, you move to the second layer, which is metadialectical interrogation.
Okay, I'm going to need a translation on metadialectical.
It sounds intimidating, but it simply means interrogating the origins and the power dynamics of that binary.
Okay.
You stop looking at the rule itself, and you ask, who authored this rule? Whose power is sustained by my belief in this binary?
Oh, wow. So you realize that your productivity versus worthlessness binary wasn't handed down on stone tablets.
Exactly. It was constructed by a hyper-capitalist economic system that absolutely requires you to tie your human value to your labor output, so that you remain a compliant worker.
You expose the sociological and historical forces that wrote the script you are blindly acting out. That's powerful.
It is. So the first layer finds the rule. The second layer realizes the rule is a scam designed to exploit you.
Right. And that leads to the third layer, which I imagine is where the actual liberation happens.
Yes. The third layer is radical critique. Now, critique here doesn't mean just complaining about the system.
It's not just posting angry tweets.
Right. It means invention. It is the drafting of what Camilio calls counter-ontologies.
Counter-ontologies, meaning new ways of existing.
Exactly. You don't just tear down the old map, you actively alter the grammar of your life.
So what does that look like for the workaholic?
Having realized that the productivity binary is a trap set by the big other, you deliberately invent a new metric for a successful day. Maybe success becomes defined by the quality of your attention or your engagement with your community. You actively rewrite the code.
Okay, but how do we actually execute this three-layer engine in our day-to-day lives? Because it sounds great in theory, but when I am exhausted at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, I am not naturally inclined to draft a counter-ontology.
Which is exactly why the theory provides a specific lived mechanism. It's called the triadic transformation.
Triadic transformation.
Yes. This is the core practice of the secular religion. It is a multi-stage, non-linear process that binds together the mind, the heart, and the hands.
Mind, heart, and hands. I like that breakdown.
It consists of 3 distinct phases. The first is the psychological phase, or PS.
So that's the mind?
Yes. This is the inward journey. This is where you bravely enter that panopticon of repressed trauma we discussed earlier.
Facing the warden.
Right. You utilize therapeutic practices, deep reflection, and psychoanalytic tools to uncover the hidden traumas and subconscious patterns dictating your behavior. You bring the shadows into the light so they lose their panoptic power.
Okay, so PS is the deep, often painful work of figuring out why you react the way you do. It's sitting on the proverbial therapist's couch.
Essentially, yes.
But therapy alone isn't enough in this framework, is it?
No, because therapy without ethical direction can just become self-indulgent navel-gazing.
Yeah, you just understand your trauma but don't do anything about it.
Exactly. So once you clear the psychological fog, you enter the philosophical phase, or PH. This is the realm of the heart, or the pro-ego.
The gyroscope.
Yes. Here, the focus shifts to ethical reasoning and value alignment. You have uncovered your raw material in the PS phase. Now, in the PH phase, you ask, what are my actual principles? What do I believe is just and good, free from the big other's influence? You construct a coherent ethical framework.
You rebuild the gyroscope. You resolve the internal conflicts and establish your moral coordinates.
Precisely. But even then, having a clear mind and a pure heart means absolutely nothing if you do not act.
Right, which brings us to the hands.
Yes. That brings us to the third phase, the hands. The pedagogical phase, or PE.
Now, pedagogy usually refers to teaching. How does that apply here?
Camilio draws heavily on Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy here. It isn't about standing at a chalkboard lecturing people. It is about applying your internal realizations to the external world through action and Socratic dialogue.
Taking it to the streets, basically.
Yes, it is the practical application of your new ethics. If you realized in the PS phase that you have a trauma response to authority, and you decided in the PH phase that your core value is egalitarianism.
Then the PE phase is where you actually walk into your workplace and change how you interact with your boss and your subordinates.
Exactly. You change how you vote, how you consume, how you speak to your neighbors. You actualize the transformation through sustained real-world friction.
This is incredibly robust. It's bridging the gap between isolated self-help and societal change.
It really does.
It's saying that personal trauma work, the PS philosophy, the PH and civic action, the PE, are not 3 different hobbies. They are one unified mechanism for human liberation.
And what is vital to grasp here is that this triadic transformation is absolutely not a straight line.
What do you mean?
You do not graduate from PS, move to PH, finish PE, and then get a certificate saying you are an enlightened being. It's not a checklist.
Right, and this brings us to the very core dogma of this entire secular religion, subjectivity as a recursive loop.
Yes.
Because traditional religions, and frankly most self-help programs, they sell us a linear narrative, right? You are broken, you follow these steps, you walk the straight and narrow path, and eventually you reach the finish line.
Heaven, enlightenment, or total financial independence.
Exactly. But Camilio says the shape of a human life is not a line, it is a spiral.
To truly comprehend the physics of this spiral, we have to trace it all the way back to the origin of the self, to a concept Camilio calls the zeroth dimension.
The zeroth dimension. I'm not going to lie, that sounds like science fiction.
It does, but it describes the unmanifest ground of being. It is the active void from which identity springs. To explain this, Camilio introduces a really profound concept from Filipino philosophy. Wala na meron.
Wala na meron. How does that translate?
It roughly translates to nothing that is already something.
Nothing that is already something. That's a brilliant paradox.
It is. It suggests that absolute emptiness does not exist. The very act of naming nothing, or conceptualizing a void, inherently bestows a determinate form upon it.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
It means that the background radiation of existence is not dead space. It is actively vibrating with the potential for emergence.
I love that. It is like looking at a blank canvas. To a layman, it is just empty. But to a painter, that blank canvas is screaming with the tension of all the possible paintings that could exist on it. It is
Yes.
an incredibly active emptiness, and from that vibrating zeroth dimension, the human self erupts into reality through four ontological tensions.
Exactly. The recursive loop of your life is driven by these four interdependent tensions. The first tension is selfhood.
The starting point.
Yes. This is the moment the emergent I stakes a claim to existence. You emerge from the wall in Omeron and say, I am.
But instantly, the moment you claim an identity, you are bounded by the symbolic scaffolding around you, right? Language, culture, your name.
Exactly. You draw a circle in the void and say, I am inside this circle. But standing still is impossible. So that leads to the second tension. The second tension is desire. This is the directional vector of your life, fueled by what we discussed earlier, the lack, the object A.
Right, that hunger.
Desire is the energy that propels you out of your circle of selfhood and into interaction with the world. You want things. You want connection, meaning survival. You move outward.
But the world is not an empty highway. When you move outward, you inevitably crash into things. Which brings us to the third and maybe most important tension. Contradiction.
Yes, contradiction. It is the inevitable friction that occurs when your directional vector of desire collides with the external world, specifically the cultural grammar of the big other or the internal sabotage of the anti-ego.
So it's when what you want hits the wall of reality.
Camilio notes that this tension creates a volumetric space. It is what actually gives life its thickness and depth.
Oh, wow. So a life without contradiction would be completely flat.
Exactly. Contradiction is a truth event waiting to happen.
Yep.
It is the crucible where your competing needs, values, and societal pressures acquire actual ethical weight.
I really want to highlight how radical this is, because most of us spend our entire lives trying to eradicate contradiction.
We run from it.
We do. If we feel friction in our marriage, or stress in our career, or cognitive dissonance in our politics, we think something is broken. We think we have failed.
We try to numb the contradiction or solve it as quickly as possible.
But Camilio is saying that the friction is the engine. The stress is the literal fuel of your evolution.
That is precisely the paradigm shift, which leads directly to the fourth tension, liberation.
How does liberation fit in if we aren't escaping the stress?
Because if you understand that contradiction is an engine, then liberation takes on a completely new meaning. Liberation is not an escape from difficulty. It is not a Zen-like state of detachment where nothing bothers you anymore.
Right.
Liberation is the active process of folding the tension of that contradiction into a new reality. It is a temporal knot that reweaves the opposing forces into a new directional vector.
So you use the friction to turn the ship.
Exactly. It reframes the struggle so that it opens up entirely new fields of possibility.
Okay, let's trace this whole loop with a real-world example so we can wrap our heads around it.
Good idea.
Imagine a woman, Sarah, whose selfhood is defined as a dedicated corporate lawyer. Her desire drives her to seek partner status. That's her vector.
Right.
But she hits a massive contradiction. She realizes the 80-hour work weeks are destroying her health and alienating her from her children. The big other demands she keep grinding, but her pro-ego is screaming that her life is totally out of balance.
A classic and painful contradiction.
So liberation in this model isn't Sarah just quitting her job and moving to a cabin in the woods to avoid the stress.
No, that's just escape.
Liberation is her taking the heat of that contradiction and folding it into a new reality. Maybe she uses the triadic transformation we talked about to negotiate a radical new role at her firm. Or she starts her own practice with entirely different boundaries. She fundamentally alters the parameters of her life.
Yes, and here is where the loop completes itself. That act of liberation feeds right back into the first tension, selfhood.
Sarah is now a new version of herself.
The I has changed. And from that new selfhood, a new desire will emerge, which will inevitably hit a new contradiction, leading to a new liberation.
But it's not a closed circle. She isn't just spinning her wheels.
No, and this brings us to a vital mechanical distinction in the text, the difference between repetition and recursion.
Okay, break those down.
Repetition is reproducing the exact same state. It is being stuck in a rut. It is Sarah quitting one toxic law firm just to join another toxic law firm with the exact same hours, having the exact same arguments with her spouse.
A doom loop.
Exactly. That is a closed circle. Recursion, however, is transformatively reflexive. A recursive loop takes the output of the previous cycle and feeds it back into the system as a changed input. You alter the underlying parameters of the equation. You learn.
So when Sarah hits her next contradiction, she is facing it with a more complex thickened subjectivity.
Yes.
Just like the spiral staircase analogy. You might walk a full 360 degrees and find yourself facing north again, looking at the exact same window. But you are one floor higher. You have a broader perspective. You aren't in the same place.
And this recursive logic is the ultimate defense mechanism of this philosophy.
How so?
It protects against dogmatic closure, the idea that you have it all figured out and can stop growing. And it protects against paralyzing relativism where nothing matters at all.
Because the motion itself is the point.
By making the process of transformation itself the normative aim of life, we can permanently abandon the exhausting pursuit of a final, perfect self. Subjectivity is not a trophy you eventually win. It is an endless, self-modifying, sacred loop.
This is all incredibly profound. I feel like my brain is expanding just talking about it.
It's a lot to process.
But I also have to admit, it is highly abstract. If we want to truly practice this philosophy on a daily basis, we need a map. We need a visual grammar to hold all these moving parts together. Which brings us to the four-simplex shape, the hypertetrahedron.
Yes, this is where Camilio moves from theory to operative practice. He utilizes multidimensional geometry not merely as a pretty illustration, but as the actual syntax of the theory.
And I remember reading this section and actively pushing back. I thought, why on earth do we need four-dimensional geometry? Why not just give us a list of rules, like the 10 commandments of the recursive self?
Right, why make it so complicated?
Exactly. Why do I need to visualize a hyperdimensional object to figure out my life?
It is a valid objection, but there is a rigorous methodological reason for it. Camilio argues that prose, or a simple list of rules, inevitably devolves into sloppy generalities.
What do you mean by sloppy generalities?
A bulleted list implies a linear, disconnected progression. Rule 1 has nothing to do with Rule 7. But human psychology does not work like a grocery list. It is a highly entangled, dynamic system.
Ah, everything affects everything else.
Right. Geometry forces us to see and define relations. The hypertetrahedron forces you to specify exactly how things connect, how edges mediate between vertices, how faces build volumes, how a change in one corner physically distorts the opposite corner.
So you can't ignore the connections.
Exactly. It requires a level of precision that prevents us from isolating concepts that are fundamentally intertwined.
Okay, I see that. It's like a cosmic, multi-dimensional Rubik's Cube.
I like that analogy.
You cannot just solve the career side of the cube in total isolation, because turning that face inherently shifts the family side and the subconscious trauma side. It is a perfect structural metaphor for human growth.
Yes, exactly.
If I use the triadic transformation to clean out my panopticon of trauma, it geometrically alters how my rhizomatic ego interacts with the big other.
Everything is connected.
So let's break down the anatomy of this sacred shape. How do we read the blueprint?
We begin with the simplest connective tissue, the edges. In this topological map, the edges represent the binary pathways, the primary lines of relation.
Really what?
For instance, the movement from selfhood to other, or the vector from desire to contradiction. They are the conduits of psychic motion.
So the edges are the roads. What happens when those roads intersect?
When three lines of force intersect, they form the triangular faces, which Camilio calls the thrones.
The thrones.
Yes, the thrones are planes of experience. They are non-dual mediations where competing claims and contradictions must be actively negotiated. They are the arenas of your life.
And when you fold four of those triangular faces together, you get a 3D shape, right?
Yes, you get the tetrahedrons or the cells. These are the 3D spaces of volumetric integration.
Wait, unpack volumetric integration for me.
If the thrones are where the fight happens, the tetrahedrons are where the complex synthesis and liberation occur. It is where the geometry gains temporal depth.
Okay, that makes sense. And finally, the most mind-bending piece of the anatomy, the Brahman point, or the foreself.
The Brahman point is the geometric representation of the recursive loop we spent so much time discussing. It functions as the central recursive node, the singularity embedded deep within the four-simplex structure.
The core.
Yes. Every single outer experience, every trauma on an edge, every victory on a throne is refracted through the Brahman point and folded back into the core, instantly altering the entire geometric structure of the self.
Can you explain the actual mechanism of that refraction? Like, how does an experience go through the Brahman point and change the whole shape?
Think of the Brahman point as a prism made of your core values, your pro-ego. Let's say you experience a profound failure on one of the outer edges. You lose your business.
Okay, a big failure.
If you lack a Brahman point, that failure just crushes that side of the shape, causing the whole thing to collapse into depression.
You just fold inwards.
But in this architecture, the experience of failure is pulled inward, passes through the Brahman point.
Where you apply that Metadialectical interrogation,
Yeah.
right? To understand why it failed and what it means for your values.
Exactly. And then it is refracted outward as a new form of resilience. The failure doesn't crush the shape. It is metabolized to upgrade the shape's structural integrity.
That is incredible. So inside this massive 4D structure, Camelio identifies 5 distinct interlocking 3D tetrahedra.
Yes, the 5 cells.
And if we are treating this as a secular religion, these 5 tetrahedra are basically, it's 5 holy books. They are the foundational truths of the system. Let's open the books. What's the first one?
The first book is the Tetrahedron of Infinite Becoming.
Infinite Becoming.
This principle states that perpetual motion is the absolute condition of life. It posits that the self is an evolving event, not a static possession. You are never, ever done.
How does that apply practically, though?
Think about the modern epidemic of burnout. People burn out because they believe that if they just reach a certain plateau, a certain salary, a certain level of domestic perfection, they can finally stop and rest forever.
They think there's a finish line.
Right. But the Tetrahedron of Infinite Becoming destroys that illusion. It teaches that no identity or role ever reaches completion.
So by accepting that you are a verb, not a noun, you stop fighting the current of change.
Exactly. You replace the exhaustion of trying to arrive with the vitality of continuous adaptation.
You stop trying to build a castle and start learning how to surf.
I love that.
Okay, so what's the second book?
The second book is the Tetrahedron of Formless Creation.
Formless creation.
This reveals a deep paradox. Form and emptiness are a single, unified process. All creation arises from formlessness, and to remain vital, it must eventually return to it. Every act of structuring a life already carries the seed of its own undoing.
I have to stop you there for a second,
Yeah.
because I completely appreciate the poetic beauty of saying, embrace dissolution and return to formlessness.
It sounds nice in theory.
Right, but practically speaking, what about when the structure that is dissolving is your 15-year marriage, or when you are unexpectedly fired from a career you literally dedicated your life to?
It's agonizing.
How on earth do we practically embrace the unraveling of our lives without just falling into sheer nihilistic despair?
That is exactly where the rubber meets the road, and Camellia provides specific mechanisms for this. Embracing formless creation means recognizing that the destruction of a structure is fundamentally required for new creation to occur.
You can't build a new house on a lot that is already full.
Exactly. The text suggests practical applications, such as creating sunset clauses for our identities.
Sunset clauses, like in legal contracts.
Yes, exactly like that. In law, a sunset clause means a statute will automatically expire after a certain date unless renewed. We should apply this to our roles in life. We need to learn how to decommission roles with dignity rather than clinging to them out of sheer terror.
Decommission roles with dignity. Wow.
We need to build grief and transition rituals into our lives. If you lose your job, the culturally conditioned anti-ego screams, "You are a failure."
Right.
But formless creation offers a counter-ontology. This form has completed its purpose. It is now dissolving to clear the space for my next iteration.
So it allows you to grieve the loss deeply, but without tying your intrinsic worth to the fallen structure.
Exactly. You mourn the form, but you protect the core.
That is a massive paradigm shift. Okay, that brings us to the third book, the Tetrahedron of Fractal Entanglement.
This tetrahedron is basically the antidote to extreme individualism. It teaches that the micro fundamentally mirrors the macro.
As above, so below.
Yes, every fragmented piece of your life reflects the totality of the system. Your individual habits, your private anxieties, and your interpersonal conflicts are not isolated phenomena. They're recursive reflections of massive collective systems and cosmic patterns.
This makes so much sense when you look at like modern politics or economics.
Oh, so
Well, if I am sitting at home feeling intense, vibrating anxiety about my productivity, fractal entanglement tells me that this isn't just a personal psychological defect.
right.
My anxiety is a microfractal of late-stage capitalism's macro anxiety about infinite quarterly growth. My personal lack of boundaries is a direct reflection of a larger cultural lack of boundaries.
Precisely. And recognizing that entanglement is incredibly liberating, it allows for profound interpretive empathy.
Empathy. How?
When you look at a political opponent who is enraged, you don't just see an evil person in a vacuum. You see a fractal expression of a broader societal wound. It moves you from sheer judgment to structural analysis.
You see the system in the person. That's powerful.
The fourth book is the Tetrahedron of Boundless Will.
Now, will usually implies brute force, right? Like forcing your way through something. How does Camellia frame it?
He frames it as structured freedom. Boundless will is infinite potential, but it can only be expressed through self-created limits.
Right, freedom through limit.
Yes, true freedom is not the absence of structure. The complete absence of structure isn't freedom. It's chaos. And chaos is deeply paralyzing.
It's like sitting down at a piano and someone says, play literally anything, there are no rules of music. You'd just freeze.
Exactly. Boundless will is having the conscious power to invent and refine the frameworks that actually sustain your vitality.
So you choose your own constraints.
You do, because those specific constraints give you the leverage necessary to create. You willingly adopt a discipline, whether it was a creative practice, an ethical boundary, or a physical regimen, not because the big other forced you to, but because it acts as the scaffolding for your authentic expression.
Which perfectly sets up the fifth and final book, the Tetrahedron of Transcendent Contradiction.
This principle exalts paradox as the supreme form of resolution.
The supreme form.
Yes, it completely rejects the old Aristotelian idea that a thing cannot be both A and not A at the same time. It states that opposites do not cancel each other out. They generate possibility.
Okay, give me an example of those opposites.
Every polarity in your life, the desire for radical freedom versus the need for comforting order, the drive for individual unity versus the reality of difference, these are not problems to be solved. They are the engine of becoming.
Think about a marriage, actually.
Let's hear it.
A marriage is a constant, unending tension between the desire for total intimacy and the absolute necessity of maintaining individual autonomy, right?
Absolutely.
If you try to actually solve that tension by merging completely, you get codependency.
Right.
But if you solve it by prioritizing total autonomy, you get a divorce.
Exactly.
So transcendent contradiction says you have to stand in the fire of that paradox every single day. The friction between intimacy and autonomy is what actually keeps the marriage alive and evolving.
You nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
You do not solve the paradox. You inhabit it.
Okay, so we have the architectural map, we understand the engine of change, and we have read the 5 holy books. But a religion, even a secular one, requires daily devotion.
It does. It requires practice.
So how do we, as ordinary practitioners, walk inside this hypertetrahedron on a Tuesday morning? How do we navigate its vertices, its edges, and its thrones?
We can view these geometric features as specific daily practices. Let us start with the vertices.
The corners.
Yes, these are the sharpest points of the shape. They represent the elemental intensities of becoming. They're not final destinations, but rather spiritual bearings to align yourself with. And there are 5 main vertices.
Let's run through them quickly so we can get to the actual movement between them.
Okay, first is singularity, the fierce possibility of self-origination and taking absolute responsibility for your existence.
Okay, singularity.
Second is multiplicity, the recognition we just discussed that the self is a fractal of the whole. Third is dissolution, the deep acceptance that to evolve is to die many times over.
The sunset clauses.
Right. Fourth is interwoven motion, acknowledging that dynamic change is the only true constancy. And fifth is infinitude, which is the complete surrender of our desperate need for finality.
So standing at a vertex is confronting a massive elemental truth. It is a moment of profound meditation.
Exactly.
But as we established with the rule of infinite becoming, you cannot just stand still forever. You have to move.
Right, and that's where the edges come in.
Roads between the points.
Yes, these are the liminal pathways connecting the vertices. The text describes navigating these edges as specific, highly practical ethical tasks.
The edges are the relational grammar of your life.
Right. They are where you actively practice holding tension. Let's look at a specific one. The edge of sovereign interdependence.
Sovereign interdependence. That sounds like a paradox right off the bat.
It is. This is the geometric pathway that runs between the vertex of singularity and the vertex of multiplicity.
So what does that look like in practice?
The ethical task on this edge is learning how to relate deeply to others without losing your core self. And conversely, how to maintain your autonomy without completely isolating yourself.
Like the marriage example from earlier.
Exactly. Or imagine a manager trying to give necessary, highly critical feedback to an employee.
Okay.
If she leans too far towards singularity, her own power, she becomes a tyrant, enforcing her will without empathy. But if she leans too far toward multiplicity, she becomes a people pleaser, withholding the feedback to avoid conflict entirely.
So walking the edge of sovereign interdependence means she has to find the exact porous center.
Yes.
She has to deliver the hard truth which maintains her sovereign responsibility to the company while utilizing profound empathy and care for the employee's development, which acknowledges the interdependence. It is a highly active balancing act.
Precisely. Let's look at another one, the edge of fractal autonomy.
Okay, fractal economy.
We discussed earlier that we are entangled in these massive societal systems. If you recognize that your individual actions are just a fractal pattern of late-stage capitalism, it is very, very easy to fall into fatalism.
Oh, yeah, you think, I'm just a tiny cog in the machine, nothing I do matters.
Right, the system is too big to fight. But walking the edge of fractal autonomy means turning that systemic recognition into strategic humility in action.
How so?
You say to yourself, yes, I am part of this massive flawed web, but because it is a fractal, any intentional alteration I make in my small localized behavior models, a different possibility for the entire structure.
Oh, wow. So you realize that changing how you treat the barista at your local coffee shop is a micro-rebellion against a macro culture of transactional dehumanization.
Exactly. You convert the friction of that paradox into meaningful motion.
That is incredibly empowering. It essentially scales personal ethics up to global impact.
It does.
And as you travel these edges doing this hard ethical work, you inevitably arrive at the thrones, the triangular classrooms of contradiction. And the text is explicitly clear that these thrones are not places of rest.
No, they're absolutely not hammocks. They are planes of experience where multiple massive forces intersect and you are forced to synthesize them.
Give me an example of a throne.
Consider the throne of infinite resolve. This throne is located where the limitless infinite potential of your life crashes into the absolute physical necessity of actually making a choice in space and time.
Wow, this feels tailor-made for the modern era. We are absolutely plagued by decision paralysis right now.
We really are.
We swipe endlessly on dating apps. We scroll for hours trying to find the perfect movie. We delay choosing a career path because we want to keep all our options open forever.
Because the big other tells us we can have it all.
Right. But the throne of infinite resolve teaches the painful, necessary truth. You cannot actualize infinite potentials. To make one life real, you have to kill off 1,000 phantom lives.
Yes. You have to mourn the paths not taken to truly walk the path you actually choose. Sitting on this throne requires the courage to say, by choosing this partner, this city, this job, I am actively closing doors. And that is not a failure. That is the prerequisite for depth.
You have to grieve the infinite to embrace the actual. That is profound.
It's difficult work.
Are there other thrones that deal with, like, the sheer speed of modern life? Because everything feels so fast right now.
Absolutely. The throne of the ever-expanding vortex.
The vortex. Sounds intense.
It represents the profound challenge of accelerating complexity. As you grow, as you walk the edges, you naturally take on more responsibilities, deeper relationships, and broader perspectives. Your life expands.
Right.
But how do you handle that expansion without simply collapsing under the weight of it? How do you avoid the vortex just tearing you apart?
So how does Camellia suggest we survive the vortex?
The text insists that the answer is designing rigorous scaffolds. You must build flexible infrastructures for your life.
What does that mean practically?
This means deliberately creating redundancy. It means establishing hard decision rules that prevent scope creep in your career. It means cultivating community norms and friendships that act as fail-safes, allowing you to recalibrate when you have overreached.
So you can't just tough it out.
No, you cannot just rely on willpower. You have to build an architectural structure that can channel the energy of the vortex safely.
By walking these edges and engaging with these thrones daily, the practitioner's fundamentally training their agency, aren't they?
Yes, it's a practice.
You learn to move fluidly through life structures. You stop treating collective contradictions as math problems requiring a single correct answer, and you start treating them as arenas to actually practice your skills.
Exactly. You inhabit the geometry.
So let's pull all the way back and look at what we've built here today.
Let's do it.
We have journeyed through an incredibly dense, multidimensional architecture. We started with a simple yet daunting premise. How do we find meaning? How do we build a secular religion, a framework for living that actually respects the massive complexity of being a human being in this century?
And what Camilleo's hypertetrahedron ultimately offers is a profound structural shift in perspective. Choosing to live this philosophy means actively abandoning the exhausting and, frankly, futile pursuit of a final, perfect self. It demands that we stop pathologizing our struggles.
Yeah.
We have to stop treating our contradictions as failures and our restless desires as mere defects to be cured.
It means treating your inner turmoil, the arguments in your marriage, the friction in your career, the paradoxes in your own mind, as the literal sacred engine of your growth. That is the redefinition of salvation here.
It is.
And you have the toolkit now. You can use the map of PAST theory to identify those internalized saboteurs. You can hear the anti-ego whispering, and you can spot the invisible billboards of the big other.
Right.
You can use the 3 layers of the triadic transformation to dig into your psyche, mathematically refine your ethical values, and take concrete pedagogical action to rewrite your personal geometry.
If we connect all of this back to the very beginning of our conversation, I really want to leave you with a final reflection drawn directly from the implications of Camilio's work.
Let's hear it.
I want you to think about your life right now. Think about the thing causing you the most stress. What if your current identity crisis, your deepest frustration, or your most paralyzing contradiction isn't a breakdown at all?
What if that intense friction you are feeling in your chest is simply the heat being generated by your psychic movement?
Exactly.
What if it is just the friction of traveling along an edge of the hypertetrahedron, preparing to deposit you onto a brand new elevated throne of becoming?
As the text beautifully summarizes, to live it is to become one's own diagram of paradox. You do not need society's X-ray machine to give you a clean binary answer of broken or not broken.
Right.
The muddy waters, the complex geometry, the contradictions you are wrestling with, that is not the sickness. That is the cure. That is the very shape of your liberation.
But I want to leave you with one final, slightly dangerous question to mull over, something that isn't explicitly answered in the text, but naturally arises from them.
Oh, a dangerous question. I like it.
If we all actually master this, if millions of people successfully adopt this secular religion, map their minds and become fluid, rhizomatic shapeshifters completely free of the big other's normative rules, what actually happens to society itself?
That is the million-dollar question.
Does it evolve into an unimaginable utopia of self-actualized, deeply empathetic individuals, or does the total lack of fixed societal norms cause the entire cultural project to completely collapse into beautiful, formless chaos?
A fascinating contradiction to leave them with.
Something to think about the next time you feel the ghost pulling your strings.